Faith over control is one of the most powerful shifts we can make in our lives. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that if we just work hard enough, plan well enough, or control every little detail, we can make things happen the way we want. But the truth is, no matter how much we try to steer our lives, we can't always control the outcomes. The world doesn't always bend to our will. Faith, on the other hand, allows us to release the tight grip we have on our circumstances and place them in the hands of someone who sees the bigger picture. Faith doesn't mean we stop taking action or being diligent. It simply means that while we do our part, we trust that the final outcome is not up to us alone. We recognize that there's a bigger force at work, one that knows far more than we ever could about what's best for us and when. When we choose faith over control, we stop relying solely on our own understanding, and instead we acknowledge that God has a plan for us. His wisdom, His timing, and His purpose are greater than anything we could accomplish on our own. When we trust that He's in control, we find freedom from the constant pressure to manage every outcome, and we can begin to live in a space of peace and assurance. Letting go of worry is one of the most challenging yet freeing things we can do. Worry has this way of creeping into our minds, taking hold of our thoughts, and convincing us that we must control everything to avoid disaster. It whispers that if we don't constantly think about the future, something bad might happen. We become trapped in a cycle of overthinking, imagining worst-case scenarios that rarely ever come to pass. But the truth is, worry doesn't add a single minute to our lives or change any of the outcomes. It only steals our peace and distracts us from the present moment. When we choose to let go of worry, we're choosing to trust that God is already working on our behalf, even when we can't see it. Worry makes us believe that we have to figure it all out on our own, but God tells us to cast our anxieties on Him because He cares for us. Letting go of worry means recognizing that there are things beyond our control, and that's okay. It's not a sign of weakness, but of strength. Strength in trusting God to take care of the things we cannot manage. In a world where we're constantly bombarded with reasons to worry, letting go is an act of defiance against the pressures of life. It's saying, I won't be held captive by fear and anxiety anymore. It's choosing to believe that no matter what happens, God has a plan that's far better than anything we could imagine for ourselves. When we stop worrying, we make room for peace to enter our hearts, knowing that the God who created the universe is in control. God's purpose for you is far greater than any individual goal or plan you could set for yourself. We often look at our lives through the lens of what we can see, what we can control, and what we can achieve. But God's perspective is eternal, and His purpose is rooted in a deep understanding of who we are becoming, and what He wants to accomplish through us. When we begin to understand that our lives are part of a much larger story, we begin to see the significance of even the smallest moments. There's a temptation to think that we must carve our own path, to constantly strive and push forward, thinking that success is solely determined by our efforts. But God's purpose for our lives is not about checking off a list of accomplishments. It's about aligning ourselves with His will. It's about trusting that He has a unique plan for us, one that may not always make sense in the moment, but will always lead to something greater than we could have ever imagined. When we begin to recognize God's purpose for our lives, we realize that every season, even the difficult ones, is part of His divine plan. Our struggles, our triumphs, and our ordinary days are all moments where He is shaping us, preparing us, and leading us towards something significant. It's not always about immediate results or visible success. It's about the transformation that happens within us as we align ourselves with His greater plan. God's purpose isn't about us simply achieving success in the way the world defines it. It's about becoming who He created us to be. When we trust in His purpose, we stop trying to force our own path and start walking in the confidence that no matter where we are or what we're facing, we are exactly where we need to be for Him to do His work through us. Strength and surrender may sound like a paradox. In a world that constantly praises self-sufficiency and control, the idea of surrendering can seem weak or counterintuitive. But the truth is, surrendering is one of the greatest displays of strength we can show. It takes an immense amount of courage and faith to acknowledge that we cannot handle everything on our own and that there's a higher power at work. Surrender is not about giving up. It's about yielding our will to God's greater plan and trusting that His wisdom is far superior to our limited understanding. When we surrender, we admit that we don't have all the answers and that we can't control every situation or outcome. This act of surrender isn't about passivity or giving in to despair. It's about actively placing our trust in the One who sees the whole picture. It takes strength to let go of the need to manipulate or force things into place. True strength comes in recognizing that God is in control and that His power will always be greater than our own. Surrender is also about giving God our desires, our fears, and our hopes. It's about recognizing that the future is in His hands and trusting that His plan is better than anything we could try to orchestrate ourselves. There's a unique kind of peace that comes when we stop fighting and start resting in the knowledge that God is working on our behalf. Strength and surrender doesn't mean we stop taking action or pursuing our goals. It means we do it with an open heart, ready to receive God's guidance and wisdom. It's about finding freedom in knowing that we don't have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. God is carrying it for us. Transformation through trust is one of the most powerful shifts that can happen in a person's life. Trust is often viewed as a simple word, but in the context of faith, it holds profound meaning. It's not just a passive belief or intellectual assent. It's a deep-rooted confidence in something beyond our immediate circumstances. Trusting God means choosing to believe that He is working in us and through us, even when we don't understand the full picture. When we allow ourselves to trust, we open the door for God to transform us in ways we could never achieve on our own. At the heart of transformation through trust is the idea that God is always working for our good, even when things don't seem to be going the way we expect. Trusting Him means believing that He knows what's best for us, even when we can't see it. Life often presents us with challenges, difficulties, and moments of uncertainty. But in these very moments, God is using those experiences to shape us. Through trust, we begin to understand that every season we walk through has the potential to bring about transformation. Whether we're facing moments of struggle or experiencing seasons of growth, God is continuously at work in the background, refining our character, deepening our faith, and leading us closer to his purpose. Trusting God also means surrendering the need for control. The more we try to control our circumstances, the more we isolate ourselves from the transformative work God wants to do. Trust, however, calls us to let go of our plans, our timelines, and our need for certainty, and instead place them in his hands. This is often where transformation begins, in the willingness to give up control and let God have his way. It is in the moments of letting go that we make space for the Holy Spirit to work in us, shifting our hearts, minds, and desires. When we trust God, we allow him to lead us into new levels of understanding. Our perspective begins to shift, and we start to see the world through his eyes rather than our own. What seemed impossible becomes possible. What seemed like a setback becomes a setup for something greater. Transformation through trust is not just about changing our circumstances, but about changing the way we approach them. We move from a mindset of fear and uncertainty to one of peace and confidence, knowing that God is with us, guiding us every step of the way. Trust also transforms our relationships. When we learn to trust God, we begin to understand what it truly means to trust others. Trusting God gives us the capacity to extend grace to those around us because we realize that God's grace toward us is unmerited and abundant. As we trust God's plan, we begin to see the good in others, even when they fail us. Transformation through trust isn't just about how we see our lives, but about how we engage with the world. We learn to offer trust, compassion, and forgiveness in ways that mirror the love God has shown us. Transformation through trust isn't instantaneous. It's a journey that unfolds over time, often in small, incremental steps. It involves learning to rely on God's faithfulness, even in the face of doubts or unanswered prayers. Every step we take in trusting God deepens our faith and opens the door for further transformation. It's in those quiet moments of surrender, when we choose to trust even when we don't understand, that God does his most significant work in us. As we trust more, we become more aligned with his will. Trusting God transforms our hearts from self-centered to God-centered, from anxiety-driven to peace-filled. It shapes us into individuals who not only rely on God's promises, but also reflect his character in our everyday lives. Transformation through trust makes us more resilient in the face of trials, more compassionate toward others, and more aware of God's presence in every moment. Trust is the key that unlocks the door to becoming the person God has called us to be. And it is through that trust that we experience the greatest transformation of all. Lessons in patience are some of the most difficult yet rewarding experiences we can encounter in life. Patience is not simply about waiting for something to happen. It's about how we carry ourselves while we wait. It is a posture of trust and endurance, a choice to maintain peace and faith even when the circumstances around us are less than ideal. In a world that thrives on instant gratification and quick results, patience can often feel like a forgotten virtue. Yet it is in those moments when everything feels delayed or out of our control that we often grow the most. One of the most powerful lessons in patience comes from recognizing that God's timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't align with our own. We live in a culture that is constantly pushing us towards speed, efficiency, and immediate satisfaction. But God's timing is not bound by our clocks or schedules. We might think we're ready for something or that we've been waiting long enough, but God knows exactly when the right moment will come. Learning to trust in His timing is one of the most profound lessons in patience we can learn. It challenges our sense of urgency and reminds us that there's often a greater purpose unfolding behind the scenes that we can't see yet. Patience teaches us to wait without anxiety. It's easy to be patient when everything is going according to plan or when we can see the outcome clearly in front of us. But true patience is developed in the uncertainty, in the waiting without knowing exactly when or how things will turn out. This type of patience requires surrender, the willingness to release our grip on control, and trust that God is working even when we can't see it. It's not about sitting idly by, hoping things change. Patience is an active trust, a conscious decision to continue moving forward with faith, even in the absence of immediate results. Through patience, we learn to develop a deeper sense of hope. Waiting can often feel discouraging, especially when it seems like nothing is changing. But hope is the fuel that keeps us moving forward during these seasons. The Bible teaches that hope does not disappoint because it is anchored in God's promises. When we choose to be patient, we choose to trust in the promises of God that He will work all things together for our good, that He is with us in every season, and that His plans for us are greater than anything we could imagine. Patience is what keeps our hope alive during the long seasons of waiting. Another lesson in patience comes from understanding that growth often happens in the waiting. We tend to view the waiting periods in our lives as obstacles, something that stands in the way of what we want to happen. But in reality, it's in those moments of waiting that God does some of His deepest work in us. He refines our character, deepens our faith, and builds perseverance. Patience isn't just about waiting for something external to change. It's about allowing God to change us internally. We are being prepared for what lies ahead. And without patience, we might miss the lessons God is trying to teach us in the process. Patience also teaches us to value the present. When we're constantly focused on the future, what's coming next, we can easily overlook the beauty and significance of the present moment. Patience allows us to live with intention, to appreciate the small moments, and find contentment where we are, even if we're not yet where we want to be. It's about embracing the journey instead of being fixated on the destination. Through patience, we learn to live fully in each moment, trusting that every season is preparing us for what's to come. As we practice patience, we also begin to see the importance of persistence. Patience doesn't mean giving up or passively waiting without action. It means continuing to pursue what we know is right, even when the path is long or difficult. It teaches us to keep going, to trust that the process is part of the promise, and to hold on to faith even when the results aren't immediate. Patience is about enduring the process while keeping our eyes fixed on the goal, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. Ultimately, patience shapes us into people who are more like Christ. Jesus exemplified perfect patience throughout His life, waiting on God's perfect timing and trusting in His plan. When we learn to be patient, we reflect the nature of God, who is patient with us, who works in his perfect time and who never grows weary of waiting for us to come to him. Patience is not just about enduring the present, it's about becoming who God created us to be. Peace in his presence is not just a fleeting emotion or a temporary escape from the pressures of life. It is a deep, abiding sense of tranquility that transcends circumstances, a peace that remains even in the midst of chaos. The Bible speaks of a peace that surpasses all understanding, a peace that guards our hearts and minds. This peace is not something we can create on our own. It is a gift that comes from being in the presence of God. When we enter into his presence, we are reminded of who he is, a God of love, comfort, and eternal faithfulness. And this awareness brings us a peace that can never be taken away. In a world filled with noise, stress, and constant movement, it's easy to feel disconnected from the peace that God offers. We often find ourselves overwhelmed by the demands of daily life, struggling to balance responsibilities, relationships, and personal desires. Anxiety, fear, and uncertainty can cloud our minds, making it difficult to find rest. Yet in these moments of unrest, God is calling us into his presence, not as a distant entity, but as a loving Father who desires to offer us peace. Peace in his presence begins with the recognition that we cannot find true peace apart from him. The world may offer temporary solutions, distractions, accomplishments, pleasures, but these things cannot bring lasting peace. They might quiet our minds for a moment, but they do not address the deeper longings of our hearts. True peace comes from knowing that we are held by the creator of the universe, that no matter what happens, his presence is always with us. When we learn to quiet our hearts and minds and focus on him, we are able to experience a peace that is beyond anything this world can offer. One of the most profound aspects of peace in God's presence is the assurance that we are never alone. So often we face difficulties and struggles that make us feel isolated or abandoned. We may even question where God is in the midst of our pain. But the truth is, his presence is always near. The Bible promises that he will never leave us or forsake us, and his peace comes as a direct result of his constant presence in our lives. When we draw near to God, he draws near to us. This divine nearness is not contingent on our ability to be perfect or to have everything figured out. God's peace is available to us in every season, even in the most challenging moments. The peace that God offers is not just a feeling or a fleeting emotion. It is a promise of rest. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus invites us to come to him when we are weary and burdened, promising to give us rest. This rest is not a physical rest alone. It is a soul-deep peace that renews our strength and restores our spirit. When we come into God's presence, we are invited to lay down our burdens and trust him with our struggles. This act of surrender is a key part of experiencing peace in his presence. We do not have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. He is more than capable of handling our worries, fears, and challenges. In his presence, we find the freedom to let go of control and rest in his faithfulness. Peace in his presence also involves a shift in our perspective. When we focus on the chaos and confusion around us, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and anxious. But when we turn our eyes to God, we begin to see things through his lens. We are reminded that he is sovereign over all things, that he holds the universe in the palm of his hand, and that he is working all things together for our good. This perspective change doesn't necessarily remove the challenges we face, but it allows us to view them with a renewed sense of peace and purpose. When we know that God is in control and that he is working behind the scenes, we can rest in the assurance that everything is unfolding according to his plan. Another aspect of peace in his presence is the healing that takes place in our hearts and minds. Life has a way of leaving us wounded by loss, disappointment, rejection, or betrayal. These hurts can cause us to carry burdens that weigh us down emotionally and spiritually. But in the presence of God, we find healing. The peace that he offers has a restorative power, bringing comfort to our brokenness and healing to our pain. When we come before God with our hurts, he doesn't condemn us or tell us to move on quickly. Instead, he offers his peace as a balm for our wounds, gently restoring us and reminding us of his unfailing love. Peace in his presence is also a peace that grows over time as we learn to trust him more fully. The more we encounter God's presence, the more we come to understand that he is worthy of our trust. Trusting in God's goodness and his plan for our lives is a foundational aspect of experiencing his peace. Often our anxiety comes from a lack of trust, the fear that things won't turn out the way we hope, or the uncertainty of the future. But as we spend time in God's presence, our trust in him deepens, and with that trust comes an unshakable peace. We begin to believe that no matter what happens, God is faithful and his plans for us are good. It's important to note that peace in God's presence does not mean the absence of challenges or difficulties. It's not a promise that we will never face hardship. In fact, the Bible tells us that we will face trials, but it also reminds us that God's peace is available to us in the midst of them. In John 16:33, Jesus says, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart." Peace in his presence is not about escaping life's difficulties, but about finding peace through them. It is the calm that comes when we know we are held by God, no matter what we face. One of the most beautiful aspects of peace in his presence is that it is not dependent on our circumstances. The world's peace is often conditional. It depends on everything going well, on external factors being in our favor. But God's peace is different. It transcends our circumstances and is rooted in his unchanging nature. When we rest in his presence, we tap into a peace that doesn't fluctuate with the highs and lows of life. It remains constant, steady, and unwavering. As we learn to abide in God's presence, we experience a peace that transforms us. It changes the way we respond to challenges, the way we interact with others, and the way we view the world around us. It's a peace that radiates from within, drawing others to the hope and comfort that we have found in him. The more we cultivate peace in his presence, the more we become agents of peace in the world, reflecting his love and grace to those around us. Peace in his presence is a gift that is available to all who seek it. It is not something we have to earn or achieve. It is given freely by God to those who draw near to him. When we make space for God in our lives, when we prioritize his presence and invite him into our daily routines, we begin to experience this peace in deeper and more meaningful ways. As we rest in his presence, we are transformed by his peace, and our lives become a testimony of the quiet assurance that comes from knowing that we are loved, protected, and held by the one who is the source of all peace.